Hello everyone. Let's start with an unboxing for a second. So I just want to talk about this before I get into the kind of the point of the video. Talk about the EQD situation, talk about the pedal industry, talk about everything that's on my mind. Machina 2 and many other models are in stock right now. I've got Machina 2, Amities, and Sender 5s all unhammered, ready to ship today, immediate shipping. For those who aren't familiar with the Fuzz Imp process, typically there's a 3-week wait. I would order in the cases and build them as I go. I actually am at a point where I'm selling things in stock from fuzzimp.com. It's a really good time to order. And there's tons of new demos out now with new artists. I'm really excited about that direction the company has been going in lately. And I figured that was a good way to start this video. Sometimes I start with jamming. We might do some jamming today, we might not. But I figured I wanted to do a little bit of a talking video. We are going into the summer season that's rapidly approaching. It's coming up on Memorial Day weekend. As I'm shooting this, it's the Friday before Memorial Day, all of which are typically really high volume sales days, really exciting times for anybody in the pedal industry. And but there's some like news kinds of things that have been going on, and I figured I wanted to address it in my own way. Even today, still seeing the fallout of Julie speaking at the Small Business Committee hearing to the Senate. And there was news articles related to this that have been released. And I'm just seeing a lot of negativity surrounding both another small builder businesses practices, just a lot of criticism and a lot of weirdness surrounding this situation. So for one thing, I will say I'll have pinned in the description of this video the link to the full Senate hearing in its entirety, so long as it's still up. As of yesterday, it was still up and I revisited it myself. One thing that you'll notice, a lot of these articles being written about this situation have really small segments and carefully kind of cherry-picked pieces of information that can be a little misleading or confusing depending on the context. I think the context on a nuanced conversation like this is really important, especially because it's opinions that reflect the state of the industry that I'm involved in. This affects people just like me, and I think it's really important. And I think that was always going to be the kind of the focus of this video, but it speaks to a couple greater things in the guitar community that I think need to be addressed. I did a video a little while back about tariffs that really kind of popped, and it had a little bit of a negative tone to it, and so I'm trying to avoid that. It also is brushing right up against political topics, which I think are very hot button and set people off anyway. And it's so rare in what I do that I ever have to even go into that. Same with religion, same with a lot of things that I'm really careful to tiptoe around normally. But because of fellow builders being criticized kind of harshly at times, I figured this is something I wanted to at least attempt to address. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, it's this Senate hearing came out and a bunch of articles are written, a bunch of response things have popped up all over guitar threads. Earthquaker is going through a really tough time due to the tariffs, is the short version, including the possibility of bankruptcy if this arc of tariffs continues. And this is since this whole thing was filmed right before the most recent kind of shuffling of the tariffs. So they were at the really elevated levels. Now they're still at a lower level, which is still quite high, depending on the scale of what you're going to be ordering. So I thought it might be worth addressing. Again, I am going to echo some of the same things that I talked about in my tariffs video, so bear with me. So initially, there was the measures that were passed that approved 145% tariff on Chinese importers, which is us buying circuit boards and components. And in addition to that, there was a retaliatory Chinese tariff that was 125%. So when it accumulated, what is that, 270%? And what that price is a multiplier on is the actual goods itself. So let's say I was ordering $100 of boards. There's a lot of shipping costs associated with that. That's not calculated as part of the tariff, but it is on the initial goods. So that $100 would be, $250 or $260 roughly, right? So now you, instead of like, say a board order for me was $500, it would be $1,100, which is a lot. It was more than I could afford at the time, especially looking at restocking things, because currently my Creature pedal is out of stock and the Adventure pedals out of stock, to order those together in the quantities that I get the best price break on. That's how much it would cost to stock up on 50 creature boards and 30 adventures. And I'm unable to do it. That's more than I can swing right now. And thankfully, Fuzz Imp is in a really good spot. I'm stocked up on certain models. I'm only putting what's for sale on the website with what I can. But for a company like Earthquaker, the quantity that they buy things in order to get the best pricing and to not be constantly behind, they make orders at a size that is unfathomable to me. So in part of that hearing, which I had initially missed even in the clips that are chunks of her testimony taken out, is they sell roughly 50,000 units a year, probably a little more, but if you break that down, it comes out to roughly 1,000 a week, which means you constantly have to be reordering parts, and the quantity that you're buying parts in necessitates freight shipping, which means you're probably realistically buying a month, 2 to 3 months ahead in order to facilitate the constant cycling, because most companies, even a company that size, the warehousing to accommodate all that storage is limited. So you can't just buy a year at a time because it would take up too much space. I'm trying not to get too in the weeds on this one. I want to kind of keep it to the point, because what was said was bad enough, right? Like, the situation is dire even at 60%, which is the current rates. If you're not familiar, it's 60% now on PCBs, and that would also include knobs, potentiometers, jacks. None of those things are manufactured here for any company whatsoever. Knobs, maybe there's some boutique companies, but you're talking about paying a 5 to 10 times multiplier, what the equivalent quality. This is not talking about cheaping out on a parts. These are just things that are manufactured better from another country and made at a cost that we can afford because of the costs of labor. And more importantly, it's not just that we're underpaying other countries for their labor, but the machinery and infrastructure to create these things does not exist in the US and hasn't for probably 50 years. You're talking about how knobs are made, like how screws are made, how cases are made. All these things are just outside the scope of American manufacturing now. We've outsourced so much manufacturing and invested in the infrastructure. Even American companies invested in the infrastructure of these other companies to get them to these elevated levels. So when you talk about, so there'll be comments. So I'm reading through the comments, and a lot of it I know is just the vitriol, is ignorance. But as someone who does this every day and knows what things cost and what it takes to get things and the way that it works behind the scenes, number one, a company operating at that scale because of their labor, their profit margin is much, much smaller than somebody like me. I eat the labor costs because it's my company, right? I sit there and I build the pedals one at a time, and I make them and I ship them out, and I kind of build in a little bit of what I think my time should cost. And oftentimes I probably shoot myself in the foot. But I'm one person, right? I'm working out of a home. I am doing all the labor. I drill the cases instead of having them CNC'd, because it would cost quite a bit to just have that one step done. By paying myself effectively do that one step, I'm saving all this money. Well, the more you scale up, the harder and harder it is to accommodate those things, because you have to have a dedicated person. You have to have a full-blown powder coat shop. You have to have people that are running, drilling, they're setting up CNC machines. You're talking about a lot of overhead that's really difficult to handle at that scale. And the comments that I'm seeing on these, and I swear, because I saw this on another friend's video that talked about tariffs, is there was bot comments. Like, there's these weird usernames that have a lot of extra letters and characters at the ends that are almost kind of feeding this certain narrative, and is really bizarre. And even on Facebook, which is, still predominantly, I would say, one of the most popular social media platforms that has a commenting system. I'm not on X or Twitter. I have Threads. But, you see these comments coming in, and I get that sometimes people are mad, or just the anger that was coming through on these comments, even on the YouTube videos, on the hearings, is so negative against the pedal companies. I think a lot of it is people just don't understand how this business works and how it has worked for a very long time. This is not a new thing that all of a sudden we switched to using Chinese PCBs or assembly services or whatever it is in order to get the parts that we need. Chip manufacturing has been outsourced since virtually the very beginning. Since the op amp was invented, they were made in Malaysia. Like, Texas Instruments hasn't manufactured op amps, as far as I know, at least the ones we use in audio, since the early 70s. We're talking about things that were decided a long, long, long time before any current situations. And like I said, the manufacturing pipeline, the facilities, even if construction had started at the beginning of this year, none of this would have existed. So to see people going, just buy American, well, it's like, well, that thing literally doesn't exist. And this is a small micro niche industry that's really quite small in the grand scheme of all manufacturing. What I do is very small. There's, maybe say 1,000 people who sell more than 100 pedals a year. That's probably an underestimation, but you get what I'm saying. Like, the kinds of things that we need for this, yes, they're shared between so many pieces of professional audio equipment, etc. But, in the grand scheme of things, this isn't like an appliance, like a stove or a microwave or a bicycle, all of which are primarily made overseas, by the way, of parts that are made overseas, even though they're purchased here. So everyone's homes are already filled with all these appliances, equipment, things that we use in our day-to-day life are made up as a conglomeration of things that aren't made in America. Anyway, I figured that was something important to highlight because people just have no awareness of really how our economy works at a grand scale and how it affects us in our everyday lives. So even at the 60% tariff rate, which is still a lot of money, when you're talking about a circuit board, is not one of the most expensive things in a pedal. In fact, it's kind of on the lower end. I mean, yes, the components that go in, they do have certain costs. And yes, when you're buying in bulk, you can get some savings. But there is no American equivalence for most kinds of capacitors, modern capacitors that fit inside pedals. Anyway, so you can tell I get worked up about this, and I have been getting worked up, and that's what led to the last video, is people not understanding the implications of these political decisions. And what I wanted to say, most importantly, was that what Julie was saying is important, and I think does really help give a voice to people like me and all my builder friends who are like, are we done? Is this it? And thankfully, I can scale back to a point that is, virtually, I can operate at virtually no overhead because of how I operate. But I don't have multiple mortgages, loans, family members that need in my insurance, the kinds of things that it takes to operate as a modern American. And honestly, living in Oregon is quite expensive, even just outside of anything else. The cost of food here is quite high. But I think the way this whole situation has affected sales is really hard for people to see. I made a post that I was looking for something because I talked about this before, seeing that so many other small companies are already throwing in the towel with the combination of higher parts costs, higher expenses, and reduced sales. That's the thing that, nobody wants to go out on their social media and say, hey, our sales are down 50% this year. And during our key tax season months, which for most people is March, April, May, we're coming at the end of May, this is kind of it until late fall. Things really don't start picking up again. There's some exceptions. There's some companies that are phenomenally consistent across the year that they can launch a product at any time and do well. And that's awesome. But for the smaller guys like me, our core demographic focuses around people getting some extra money and spending it on pedals. And at a time when people are really uncertain about the economy, they're worried about their food and, being able to afford things in their houses. Buying luxury items like guitar pedals is a really low priority. And I think I talked about that a bit in my tariff video. So forgive me if I'm repeating myself on that. But I've noticed it. That's something that has been pretty brutal. When I first started was kind of during the peak of the shutdowns. I started in January of 2021. It was really easy to sell pedals. It was amazing as far as that goes. Just the huge spike in growth and interest in the musical industry. People picking up the guitar again for maybe the first time in years. Buying a lot of boutique equipment. So it was also kind of this sentiment of we want to buy things that are, we can have some pride in ownership. And I think that's harder to tell as the brand story. And I want to share something. I posted something kind of around as all this happened. And this little statement, I posted it on Threads. I honestly, that day was kind of a rough one. I'm out helping my dad with a cabinet install, kind of going through it, back hurts. And I sit down and I post this thing about Fuzz Imp, and it said, Fuzz Imp is literally one guy working out of a garage building pedals one at a time. And I live in beautiful rural Oregon, USA. It's as USA built as anything gets these days, which I think is important for people to understand. Except I got sidetracked. And every sale typically is a friend or friend referral directly. In fact, 90% of my sales are repeats from regulars, believe it or not, which is 100% true. Join the family and bring home an imp. And I posted this on Threads, and it got me 40 new followers. So I have 2,040 roughly, which is really cool. It's good that message resonated, and I wasn't even sure why. It's like, did people not know this? Like, it's just me. I make the pedals. I work here. This is where I live. And I think just that gets lost, as Americans, predominantly my audience is American, no disrespect to any other countries, but, you kind of sell to who you know. Like, you could even look at the age demographics for my videos. My strongest demographic is males between the ages of 35 and 45, which is roughly where I'm at, right? So it's not surprising to me that these things, you kind of are what you attract, etc. So there is something to that. But kind of in conclusion, try to be kinder online. I also noticed Josh from JHS had to put out some statements taking a lot of heat for his approach to the Not a Dumble pedal marketing, which I had one. It was great, but I had to sell it to a friend because he really wanted it more than I did because he couldn't get in at the launches. I got in on the first one. Really good sounding pedal. I had literally no complaints about it. And then it was starting to sell out faster and faster. So the first time it was for sale, it was like a couple hours before they sold out of what they had. The next drop, it was like 30 minutes. The next one, it was less than 10 minutes. I think there's one going on today that's probably, they're blowing them out as super fast. And then he made an apology video talking about, oh, I accidentally made the circuit, all of which is legitimately fine. I had no issue with any of it. In fact, the clean part of that pedal was what sounded amazing to me in the first place. Like, it's like, wow, I really like whatever is going on with this clean boost. It really kind of adds some nice squish and sparkle, and whatever it's doing to the tone, perfect. And for the price point, you can't beat it. And, I have to admit, originally when I got the thing and I saw that it was selling out so fast, by the time I got it, it had been about a week or so. I was like, oh yeah, I'll just flip this, whatever. But I then kind of slowed down and I was like, eh. And then a friend of mine was like, oh, I keep missing the drops. I was like, you're the one. I'll sell it to you at retail, which is what I did. But he put out this long statement saying people are criticizing the marketing style and campaign, the circuit swap, all these things. And it's like, look, we're just people trying to exist. Even JHS was just probably, I don't know who's bigger. I don't think anybody really cares if JHS sells the most pedals or Earthquaker sells the most pedals. They're both in the top 3-4 of the American boutique or American high-end pedal makers, right? So, but even that, in the grand scheme of the world, they're still only selling a few $1 million of pedals a year. Between the both of them, it's what a tech company or a big industrial company does in a month for a whole year. The company I used to work at selling dental equipment, they did $500 million in gross sales a year. So your average month is like 30 or 40 million. It's the peak months, it was like closer to probably 60 million in sales. It's like, and that's one really small industry as well. It was a big company, 1,000 people work there, but it's like, that's one company that I randomly worked at. There's tons of other companies. Like, this is a small industry of people that are not in it for the money. Yes, they want to survive and pay their bills and pay their employees, but this is an industry and a passion project for musicians and creative people that really want to make it. And I think that's what has really changed my perspective. Even from when I first started, I used to be like, oh, you know, these brands, they just cash in on their reputation and make all this money and all these things. And it's like, yes, they worked very hard for that. And even that is still a pretty small payoff. So anyway, let's try and be kinder to our companies. Get the full context. Avoid trash news that is AI slop. And yeah, I hope you have a good day. Check out fuzzimp.com. Sorry for the ramble and the rant, but when I get fired up, I fire up the camera. So have a good one, everybody.